Finding the right riding position on your bike can be an ongoing process. It may take a couple of months to hone in on a new bike. It may even adapt over time as you become a better rider or as you specialize in a certain type of riding. However, there are 6 key areas that you can start with, and I'm going to go through that in detail with you now. Reach is one of the most important things that will affect your riding position, and it also affects the fit of your bike. So reach is a measurement from bottom bracket to the center of the virtual head tube here, so that length there. And it will affect how a bike feels when you're sat on the bike and when you're stood up as well. So it can make a bike feel big or small, and it will affect the riding, the handling as well. If you're unsure of what reach measurement you need, then try and compare it to an old bike and decide whether it felt right for you or not. Have a look at the geometry charts for the new bike that you're looking at. They generally give you an idea of what reach you need according to what height you are. Also, you can go onto geometrygeeks.com and compare your old bike with that new bike and see how different it might feel. If you feel like you're caught between 2 reach options or 2 reach lengths, then going upwards or sizing up into a longer reach may make your bike feel more stable for an enduro or trail bike, or it might make it feel more aero for an XC bike, but that can be uncomfortable if you're not used to that position. Sizing down will make your trail or enduro bike feel more nimble and more maneuverable, and for an XC bike, it might be a more comfortable fit. Reach can be a really important measurement for trail riding and, say, descending and pedaling out of the saddle. However, saddle height is obviously really important measurement for when you're sat down and pedaling, particularly if you're going to do long distances. If this measurement is too long, you could end up overextending your legs, and this could damage your knees. If you have a saddle height that's too short, you might not be getting full rotation, you certainly won't be getting full power, and you could still injure your knees by pushing them in the wrong way. I think the best place to start is to match your saddle to your pedal height with your inseam measurement. Or roughly, this should be sat on the saddle with your heel down to the pedal. That way, when you move your foot to place the ball of the foot on the pedal, you should have a slight kink in your knees, roughly about 30 degrees. Now, there is a lot more science to this, and if you're going to be doing long distances, I do recommend going to see a professional bike fitter and get that saddle height dialed in, especially for you. Little bonus tip here for you as well. Moving the saddle forwards and backwards is a way of making sure that your knee is over the top of the pedal, and that will give you a good pedal stroke. It'll also give you a better fit when you're sat down reaching for the handlebars. Bar width can completely alter the way a bike feels. It can feel too big or too small. It might feel more maneuverable and manageable or more stable. It can even make you a stronger climber. So roughly speaking, having wider bars can make it feel more stable, say for example on the descents, but it can feel unmanageable if it's too big. Narrow bars can feel more nimble and more responsive, particularly if you've got an XC bike. It can also give you a stronger frame as your hands come in together, and it can make a stronger frame for climbing and pedaling too. That's why we tend to see narrower bars, say around about 740 millimeters in cross country, and why we see wider bars, say around 760 to even 800 mils in enduro and downhill. Now, there's no set rule on what width you should have. It does depend on your body and your arm span, for example, but also on your style of riding and what you're going to do. Now, I have done a more detailed video just on handlebar width, so do check that out. I'll leave the link in the description below, and that should give you a good starting point. Handlebar height is one of those things that genuinely does change your position on the bike, whether you're sat down or stood up. Now, for example, I've actually moved my stem down here in Bentonville, and that was because it's quite cornery here, and I was finding that my front end was wandering a little. And basically dropping the stem by only 5 or 10 mil can have a really big effect on how you weight the front end. It will pull you forwards, it will slightly increase your reach because the stem moves diagonally down the steerer tube of the fork, and it will also be lower so that you're having more weight on the front end to control that front wheel. Now, some people like to higher their stems for a more controlled feel on steep technical terrain so that your weight is more centered when you're descending. And some people like to lower stems, for example, in XC, because that way you can weight the front when you're going up steep climbs. So this really is a matter of personal preference and depends on what you're riding and what your riding style is. But the great thing about this measurement and this portion of Bike Fit is that you can change it without cutting anything. Just try taking some spaces out, putting them underneath the stem, sorting it all back out, and see if that is better for you or not. You can always put it back. Now, the saddle angle doesn't affect your riding position as such, but it is there to accommodate the riding position that you like, and that way it would be a much more comfortable ride. So if you're riding something like enduro, where your style is to ride up a lot of steep fire roads and then descend with the saddle down, then you can afford to have a seat angle that accommodates your position while you're riding up the hills. So that might mean having a nose down position so that when your bike is facing upwards, you're actually sitting on a nice level platform, and the sit bones in your hips can sit right at the back of the saddle, and you won't have a nose in your way making things uncomfortable. If you've got an XC bike, then you might have to adhere to certain regulations if you're racing national events, for example, whereby your saddle needs to be almost dead level. But that does tend to be a very neutral position for XC because you will be descending and climbing probably quite equally anyway. Now, brake lever, again, doesn't affect your position so much, but it is adjustable in order to be more comfortable and safe when you choose your preferred riding position. So, for example, if you're pedaling a lot, you might want to get your brake levers at an angle where your wrist or your forearms on your hand is kind of like a smooth line, and then you can just place your forefinger on the brakes. And I tend to move my levers in and out until it's slightly under the first bend or the first knuckle on your forefinger. Of course, it is riding preference. We see people like Emily Batty racing with her middle finger so that she can hold on to the grips with a more stable forefinger and then brake with a middle finger. And also we see other riders in downhill and enduro who have lever positions slightly up. And what this will do is it means you get to rest on your handlebars and your grips, almost like in a press-up position, and then your fingers can just lightly touch the brakes. And this apparently solves arm pump, although I'm not 100% convinced, and I prefer the neutral position even when I'm racing enduro. So there we go, 6 ways to fine-tune your riding position. But I always say that Bike Fit is a process, not a one-time event. It will adapt, you will need to fiddle with things as you go on. So don't be deterred if it doesn't feel right straight away. Just keep going with those changes. And give me a big old like if you want to see more helpful tips like this in the future.